All right, everybody, welcome to episode 50 of the Full Grain Podcast, which is a nice round number. Today, we're going to welcome back a returning champion, Esteban. Thanks for coming back, Esteban. If you guys haven't listened to episode 48, we had Esteban on to explain the wet end tanning process at Horween Leather Company. That also translates to most other tanneries. Essentially, how do you tan leather? So today, we're going to finish off the process and talk about finishing and how do we finish leather. You guys ready to do this?
Yeah,
I'm ready.
All right, to start off round two here, maybe this is leather finishing 101. The last time we left off at leather tanning 101, we were at the wet end after retanning. So the next step would be drying. So we're going to have Esteban explain some of the drying and finishing. And after that, we had your questions that people left comments for this episode. So we'll be answering people's questions about leather finishing and maybe some follow-ups about leather tanning if we had any. And then additionally, please leave your questions in the comments for Esteban about finishing or tanning. We're happy to answer those. So Esteban, start us off after retanning with the different drying methods.
So before the drying is done, they're out of the mill and they're still soft, swollen with water. So then one of the key aspects is to set it, right? So we have setting machines, and we have at Horween, and then we have the wringer press. So all these are just mechanical action that you're trying to squeegee out water, and you're opening up the sides, kind of like just removing a good amount of water because it'll be more efficient in your drying methods. And so depending on which articles you're running, you would do that. But once that's done, now you begin to dry, and we'll list pretty much the basic ones, which is you hang dry. It's just aerating without it, with or without heat. Then you have vacuum drying. So vacuum drying is creating there's a chamber which creates essentially a vacuum. And when you're adjusting these, removing pressure from that environment, you're allowing waters to essentially boil off. Not obviously, like, we're not imagining like heating up a lot, but it's more of a quick pre-drying. And so then routinely after that is then you proceed to hang. So that's one of them. The other one would be pasting. So pasting is essentially you have these big frames, and I'm sure you guys talked about that one as well. But essentially you're putting adhesion sort of on the back end of the sides, and you're letting them all sit on these frames. So essentially you're drying them, and the whole goal of this, I guess, is to try to keep as much yield as you can, because right now that these sides are drying, they're shriveling. So again, you're shriveling sides, and that's going to affect your yield, and it'll make it also blotchy. The fibers will interact differently. So essentially those would be the first couple of methods there.
I think an obvious question is, why would you choose one of those drying methods over another?
I think it's just a matter of like the characteristics that you're trying to accomplish. You're trying something that's tight. You want to be able to capture it, and vacuum drying offers that because you're essentially drying it really rapidly and without allowing a time for shrinkage. But let's say if you're hanging it, you want it to be more, I guess, firmer, right? That'd be the key thing, because it's going to be shriveling up as well. And then at that point, yeah, I mean, I feel like just depends on the type of characteristic that you're adding.
Yeah,
it depends on the
toggling is different.
Yeah, toggling's in there too. It depends on the retannage, and you get different performance, and then also appearances from all those too. So air drying, the leather shrinks back. Bad for the tannery, good for the customer, because you end up with something that's very dense.
The most critical part, Esteban mentioned the yield. Can you drill into that briefly, Nick?
Yes. Yeah. So in the larger world, the tannery or the tanning business is yield driven. So the idea is when you tan a skin, you want to end up with a skin that's as large as possible. So as many square feet or square meters as possible. Because then you're spreading out whatever overhead costs, whatever that is, you're spreading that out across a larger area, and you can get more money for that skin because you charge by the area. So yield is very important. So a lot of the tanning process, especially on the modern side, is very yield driven. So they're trying to get the skin to relax and be larger, and then when you dry it, you want to stretch it when you're drying it, and you don't want it to shrink at all, so that you end up with this this piece that's as big as possible. That's not what we do. That's not what everyone does, but that's what the mega tanneries are doing. So air drying is the opposite of that, where you're hanging it up and there's nothing's, it's not affixed to anything or clipped to anything, which we'll talk about in a second, that's preventing it from getting any smaller. So it shrinks as much as it wants, which in the case of something like Chrome Excel is like 20%. So that has the effect of making it more expensive because you've got 20% less area that you're getting out of that hide. And the hide itself is the biggest cost component. So air drying is good because you get a dense product, which is good for for break and for the roundness of and how it feels and how it ages and all that. So that's a traditional method. And you talked about vacuum drying, which is good because it's fast, relatively fast, compared to something like air drying, which can take like a week. And you end up with a really smooth, flat grain character because the grain is dried against this heated steel plate that's inside the chamber that you just talked about, Esteban. The limitation there being that we cannot dry, or no one can dry very oily leathers because there's a screen that lowers down over the flesh side of the leather that's kind of sucking out that additional, or that moisture that's evaporating out at that inside that depressurized chamber. And anything that's very greasy or very waxy blinds up those screens and clogs the machine up, and then it just doesn't work. So there's a limit to how oily of a leather you can put in the machine like that. So you can't just decide to do everything that way. At least we can't. And toggling is like, if you imagine like the old timey pictures of they're stretching the leather over like a wooden frame and they're tacking it in place with nails. It's kind of like a reusable version of that. So you're stretching it a little, not a ton, and then when it dries, it shrinks a little, not a ton. So it's sort of like an in-between drying method where you end up with something that shrinks a little, but the main difference there, or one of the main differences, is that you get a very tall, very pronounced grain character because the surface shrinks back just enough to give you like a really, really pronounced grain. And the last one is pasting. And that one is, they're big glass frames that are the size of a half a hide. And it's like kindergarten paste. And you apply that to the grain side and you slap the grain to these massive glass or ceramic frames. And with scrapers, you do push it out and you stick it to this frame, and then it goes through what's effectively an oven. So that's, relatively quick compared to the hanging. So that's like, that's 6 hours, 4 or 5, 6 hours. You can decide how fast and how hot that piece of equipment is. Vacuum drying is, 10 to 12 to 15, or you can decide there too. So that's minutes. So that's quick. But as Esteban said, a lot of times that stuff doesn't come out all the way dry. So it has to be hung up also. And then toggling and air drying are whatever the atmospheric conditions will let you do. So 3, 4, 5, 7, 9 days, depending on how thick it is and what the temperature is and all that. So
drying your clothes is a really good analog to this. So if you have ever dried your clothes on a hanging line or something out in the air, just letting it air dry, you may notice that it's a little more gentle on the fibers of that t-shirt, for example. So you might get a little less effect in terms of like breaking up those fibers. You might get a little longer durability on your shirt. It's kind of the same notion that I've seen in the leather. It's just a little bit more gentle, but it also shrinks in a significant amount. You might notice your shirt's a little smaller. So that has an interesting feature, like a side effect for break in the leather. We perceive the delamination of the grain layer to be a little less pronounced when the leather's air dried. So leathers like Chrome Excel get air dried for that reason.
It depends. It depends on a lot of different stuff too. It depends on the the retange and everything else that's in there, and heat. Heat's a big part of it too. I mean, so vacuum drying we can and pasting too. We can set the heat we want, and to give an example, Essex is vacuum dried. And there's no chrome in that product. That's a veg product. So we could probably turn the vacuum dryer up enough so that that leather would come off and be fully dry. It just would destroy the leather because it'd have to be too hot, either too hot for in general, or just too hot for too long, and it wouldn't the veg tan doesn't, it won't really tolerate that. That
Yeah, if
process
people aren't
that way. So,
aware,
yeah, heat's important.
You can cook any leather that is veg tanned at around 100. I don't have the real number. Maybe Esteban, but from what I've seen, it's around 130 degrees Fahrenheit for a decent amount of time. You can cook that leather to where it becomes almost like a potato chip, very firm, and
Yeah,
sometimes the appearance gets kind of gross too.
yeah, you've got some time. It's not like it's not like at 130 the thing starts to have issues. Like if you take it to 130 for a long time, you might start to see some stuff on some leathers, but it just depends. There's so many things. Again, it depends a lot there too. What the humidity is and what the leather is and everything.
I think people shouldn't sleep on this concept of drying, although they have no choice just to buy the leather. They won't know how it was dried, but if a tanner's listening or people are curious about this, I think the effect of the grain is significantly different on each of them as well. So Nick mentioned with the toggling or air drying, you get a little bit more of a raised grain. Most of the leathers that Horween makes that are pebbled tend to be toggled for that reason. You get a little bit more of a pronounced grain character. It's got nothing to press up against when it's drying. On the contrary, vacuum drying and pasting, you're smushing the grain right up against a thing, so you get a very flat, compacted grain. It's definitely a different look that people might be curious about.
I think that it's interesting too that whatever the leather is, it kind of tells you. It's sort of the just how it. There's kind of like only one option. I should have said that way and not stumbled through it. But like Chrome Excel, we can paste it. We can't vacuum dry it. We can toggle it, but it sort of doesn't really make sense. And we can paste it, but it's not a good product. It's not the same product. We have it's a different product that we don't really offer because we just don't. It's not nice. And cordovan, as an example, that gets pasted against glass with no heat because we want that to be really flat for processing purposes, but we can't use any heat because it's a pure veg. So as you start to look at the physical characteristics and like what the leather can tolerate, it's not like all four options are always available for everything. So
right.
It's kind of, that's why it's like not really much of a choice, even for us. It's just sort of defaults to where it just sort of ends up where it ends up. Or at least that's the way it feels.
What do you think about this, Esteban?
You guys bring good points. Yeah, I mean, that's, again, it's arbitrary in terms of what articles you're making, right? I'm going to sound like a broken record, but that's the cute question. What are we making here?
That was your theme on
I kept saying it over and over again because it's such, there's so many different ways and directions we can go. But yeah, I mean, so then at that point, after drying, now we're going to start getting crust, right? Something that's open. You told me this before years ago. It's like an open canvas. So you just start off with some fresh crust. You just finish retanning it. But now there is certain aspects where you do have to take precautions in checking your moisture levels on these sides, because think about it, you dry them up like you said with the shirts, and now if you're gonna try to relax the fibers again, depending on temper specs that you're looking for. So that's where you're gonna use a staking machine. But then what happens if the sides are too dry and I throw it in there? That mechanical action will cause ripples, and you'll have damaging effects if it's too high. So it's important. There's a thing called conditioning that you normally would do. So you check your moisture, you add a little bit of water. We're not drenching it again, but it's just more of a leveling it out. And ideally, once that's been set, you're equalizing your moisture. So then you can go ahead and introduce it to a staking machine, and the fibers will be, in a sense, a little more relaxed.
Can you describe that staking machine? I don't think anybody would know what that means.
Essentially, I was just moving around.
This is what it is.
Yeah. You said temper too. Temper is a measure of softness, so how soft or firm something is. There's a numerical value that we can assign to it, so people can order it and it can be repeatable. It's not just like, oh, I want it to be kind of soft. It's like, no, I want it to be this number on the temper gauge. Yeah.
So the staking machine essentially is, I like to think of as like a massaging machine. It's just there's pins inside that machine. It's rolling through a conveyor of fabric. You're sliding in those sides in there, and so essentially you're just massaging the leather, like if you would grab it with your hand and do it, but just at a bigger volume. And essentially what you're doing that is obviously relaxing the fibers and getting where, like Nick said, the temper range that you're looking for.
It's like fingers coming from top and
Yeah.
top and bottom, more or less. So you're flexing it a little,
In a ton of places.
but a bunch of times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and settings is an interesting thing too. That's like the easiest way to picture that, I think, is like the old timey, like wash tubs. They had like the part where you'd wash it, and on the top you had like the wringer. It was like the two rollers where you'd feed the clothes through, and you would wring out the moisture. Like that's oversimplified, but that's sort of what both the wringer press and the setting machines are doing. But
You're
with
jumping,
different,
you're jumping around here. I don't want to confuse people, but setting is happening before drying.
Yeah, before drying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I said, that's what I thought. It was like more. I think of it like a squeegee, right? You're squeegeeing out the excess water before it's dried. But yeah, so
are
okay,
you saying
then,
that like the softening or adding moisture after any of the 4 drying processes is the next step always? Or
it depends on the grain article, but ideally that's what you need to be doing, because you need to have making sure that your moisture levels are always in pair with what you're trying to do. Because let's say you're not gonna be staking it really hard and it's a light stake and you want something firmer, then in that case probably not. But if you want something soft, you may make sure that your moisture is also on key, so those fibers won't rip, or looseness, how you'll find. So you'll see these things throughout the procedures of the whole tanning process there. But yeah, so again, going back to the staking part, I like to think of it, like you said, as the open canvas, right? So now we have all these sides, and now it's really the transformation of the final product. That's what's called finishing, obviously, right? So we're upgrading the process, the appearance, the feel, the performance. All these things are all happening in this one department. So it's pretty big. It's a pretty big section in terms of kind of almost as equivalent to retan. It's like a hand in glove, because they both need to work together and figure that out. So I mean, would you want to go through the steps?
well, yeah, I have such a linear brain, and this is the part where I get to when like today's very fresh. I gave a tour at the tannery today, and when we get to finishing, there's many lines that lead into finishing, but there's no linear trajectory for leather through finishing, as far as I can tell. It's sort of like really jumps around. So in the past, I found it best to sort of just describe the different processes and maybe different materials and what each of them do.
Yeah, and to your point, Phil, finishing. So finishing is our biggest department. It's the most. It's pretty much the whole third floor, which is a big floor, and it's got the most people in it, and it has the most complexity also. And in our case, and in many cases, it's like where there's sort of the most room, I think, for creativity, like on the fly, because you're constantly having to make adjustments for color and for weather and for all of this stuff. So we have our work cut out for us, because it's like you said, Phil, there's like, it could go through one and then it sits overnight and it's going to go through that same thing over again. And we'll talk about that, but it's complicated. There's a lot of steps.
I just find it tremendously difficult to encapsulate finishing as a concept and like generalize it. It's just too much. I just noticed going through the machines and the materials are helpful for people to understand. So
Working on the surface. So, adding or adjusting color, texture, softness, how shiny something is or how dull something is. If there's specific performance requirements for a top coat, in terms of like UV or anything like that. I mean, all of that stuff happens in finishing. Feel, you can change how something feels.
Like I said, I like to think of it as makeup. Like you got a couple of pimples, and then we have to start fixing up, cleaning it up a bit. So again, like how Nick was mentioning the top coat. So essentially, they come back so let's say just what it is, a basic coating, right? So you have crust. It's just naked, natural, and so then even before it depends on the article, right? It's full grain, would go there after it's been staked. But if it says corrected grain, it has to go through buffing. But we'll touch that a little bit later. But for basic finishing, like the steps would be, you want to do an adhesion coat. So what is an adhesion coat? Essentially is just a coat that's sticky and soft. And so that's going to essentially prime your grain. So whatever you're trying to put on there, it's going to be caking. You're making a cake, right? So that adhesion coat will create more sort of connections onto your following step, which would be a base coat. So the base coat revolves around using different resins, acrylics, but usually you're using it as well to try to level and uniform the color. So what if you want a red color? Now I have to start aiming for a specific type of red if the customer came with a standard. And so that's your opportunity to try to level out and color match. And then you have your top coat, which is essentially that's going to be like your sealing final coat because that's going to be protecting from the environment. So at this point, it's not so much you could still manipulate with dyes, but you're really using it for performances. Like if you want a leather that if you want it to be really silky, now you're going to be adding those components into the top. So if you want it to be more rigid, rough on the top, this is where it kind of like falls into depending on what article you're making. Um, but essentially, it would come down to those three when it comes to finishing the actual sides.
It's so
And
amazing
now,
to me that you said base coat because I actually never think about base coats. And it's probably because when I was working and finishing up there, we didn't do a lot of them. I think what we would do is actually an additional step before the adhesion. We would stain the crust and then adhesion and then skip a base coat and just put a top on it. So
no,
this example I'm just saying is like you could finish it in so many different ways.
yeah, it's
That's
like
what-
it's a different cake, but again, this would be like the most generic one that you would right off the bat. And then you start to think about also in terms of those finishes, like are we using pigments or are we using dyes? I know we mentioned dyes back in the retan. That's just obviously coloring itself, the crust. But now here you have much more manipulation of what it is you're trying to achieve. All right, if you're using pigments, you're going to cover a lot. It's going to help a lot. And like, again, the theme is going to be here is called upgrading. You're upgrading stuff, normal scars that you would see on your sides with pigment will only take you so much, but it will cover a lot. Essentially like makeup, right? When you put it on your foundation, all this, you'll cover a lot of your pimples or your stuff on your face. But then you have dyes, right? Staining, color. The difference between those I feel are like the big color fastness, the light fastness, like the ability for it to change over time and fade. Dyes don't have that. That's why we see a lot of our stuff fade over time and the patina. It all goes back into the article. But you see pigments like you see European leathers and stuff like that. They love pigments. And you can cover a lot and everything's gonna be exactly the same all the time. Uniformity is like their game. So it's interesting to see that being mixed. But again, I mentioned acrylics and resins. These things are carriers essentially because you can throw stain in there, but it's probably gonna splotch. It's not gonna do well. So you need something to interact with. So that's why when you do a formulation, you're gonna be putting a certain amount of water, certain amount of acrylics, resins, and these things will help carry the dye that you're trying to accomplish, or pigments as well, into the sides. When you're spraying them or you're swabbing them, right? That's different. And then that's another thing we're going to jump to, right? It's like the methods of how we apply these dyes or tops. Normally for us, conventionally, it's the spraying machines, right? So, or if you're in the sampling, you're doing it manually. And we've all seen that there is differences because of the technique, how the technician's running it with their hand versus the machine. So yeah, so those are definitely things that
I've got a question I've been holding for years. I recall there were moments where Frank, the foreman of the finishing department, would say, "Hey, I'm trying some dyes from the basement," which translating to layperson speak was, "I'm using some dyes that are intended to be used in the color and retan wet end department." And I guess I never really understood what's the difference between the dyes in the finishing department versus the dyes in the basement in the wet end.
I feel the reason being for those is a lot of the dyes that are in the retan or coloring department are kind of designed for penetrating. There really are penetrating dyes, so they would dive in a little more. But for finishing, you're not really looking to penetrate your all the way. You're like I said, your main interest is the grain. So that
What
layer,
makes it penetrate?
depending on the type of dye. So I mean, I'll show you my little. I'll send you a clip of the little board of what I got. So the different types of dyes, right? There are acid dyes, basic dyes. There's reactive dyes. There's different complexes on how they, again, talking about how the carrier works. So this type of dye, for example, if you're running with an acid dye, it's going to be working. It's going to be anionic, so it's going to want to interact with sides that are positively charged. So depending on what your article, if you're just trying to do it on the top, you're gonna do that because it's gonna spray on top. Then you have basic dyes that are positively charged, and so you want sides that are be negatively charged so they can fix again on the top. So those differences in manipulation is what is causing the article to either go on the top or stay in the middle. But we've used them sometimes interchangeably, because for us, it's in the finishing, they're just caring for the grain, but for downstairs, that's really where it's more specific, where it has to be a specific color, it has to be targeted, it has to go all the way down. So for finishing, they got kind of in the easier way where it's already it's kind of like you can sometimes use it, but for them, they mostly still use the same dye type, except that it's already been kind of pre-dissolved. Because you'll see, that's why you see, I forgot to mention I think in the retan, the dyes downstairs aren't called dyes, they're called dye stuffs. It's just the nomenclature. It's because the stuff, I imagine it goes in and it stuffs. That's probably why I came up with that name. But normally they're in powdered form. So at that point, again, you have float, you have all these things that are going through there, so they can easily mix. But again, if you're running sides that are dry upstairs, you have to make that finish, and you have to dissolve your dyes. So suppliers that we work with oftentimes already give us dyes already in a liquid state, because it's logically, it makes sense. You already have a liquid, and it'll blend faster with whatever formulation you have. But
and you can control concentration too.
For sure, yeah.
So I guess where I was going with, by the way, the chemistry was awesome that you jumped into. So answer as many questions with chemistry as you can, because that stuff is over my head. When I asked about the penetrating, you said a reason to use the wet end dyes in finishing is because they penetrate more. Couldn't you just add some sort of penetrating agent to your dye mix that's intended for finishing spraying anyways? Don't they already use thinners? And
they use penetrators there as well. I mean, again, they're usually in forms of alcohol derivatives. Obviously not pure alcohol like we imagine, but these types of solvents will work in order to dive in faster. But like I said, in terms of penetrating, you're not really using that in coloring and the retan. That's all in the float. So that's why it's designed to just be by itself as a solid, versus in finishing, you really need to penetrate like if you wanted to go inside on the grain part. When I say penetrate, I mean on your grain side, not all the way through the corium, like the middle point of it. Because that's really, unless, I mean, we've seen when we finish like wax flash and stuff like that, or you want to spray on the flesh side, but you never really truly get inside the middle point of your leather. But yeah, hopefully that I'm not confusing you. Hopefully that.
No, I'm just curious. So are they literally the same dyes, just blended somehow differently, or maybe acid or basic?
It's more or less they have to be similar. I mean, I'm guessing also the range of colors that they probably have. And also there's I was mentioning Nick as well, like the specs with these certain dyes, they always kind of grade based on the color fastness, like the change of color. And so those could be issues why, or it could be just that specific color of the dye that they have in dye stuff. They like that green, and we're going to use that same green. So why are we going to go find a new green where you can just use that green too? So it's more interchangeable, and it's more forgiving when you use it there as opposed to downstairs and in coloring.
I think that the main difference is maybe when you're talking about pigments, because I think that the pigments that you would use in coloring are specialized, and you're not really using pigments downstairs. Like I say that like everyone knows what we're talking about.
We're still at work.
You're not really using pigments in the wet end as much because you're not trying to dye with solids, you're trying to dye with dyes. So I think that you're at least in our place, you're more almost exclusively, you'll see pigments when you get into the dry leather, when we're working on just the surface. So that might be the main distinction that I can think of.
Okay. I'm throwing hard pitches today, guys.
But also,
honestly, that's always been on my mind. I've never actually understood it.
Esteban, I liked your foundation example. That's because we've all seen people that put too much foundation on and it does not look good. You can't just like cake it on. You just gotta, there's an artistry. You need to know what you're doing. And if you put a lot on, you need to really know what you're doing, or you need to not put a lot on and it just looks more natural. So that's an interesting, I guess. Yeah, it's interesting. It's good.
Yeah. Makeup. And so then, like for example, the train of thought when you're finishing like that, going back to the adhesion, the base coats, and the top coats, you want to go with softer to harder in the sense that, like I was talking about, you want something soft, malleable that will go through on the inside on top of the grain, and then you start working on the toughness. Because again, when someone says like tough top, right? Like I want this leather to not scratch easily or something. Those things are again blends of different acrylics, and so it'll create a film. Literally, it's like if you grab these acrylic and resins that we have and you let them dry out, you see little caking films. So that will show you the toughness or hardness of that particular finish on the top coat. So you always want to start from soft to hard, because if you start from hard to soft, most of the time your stuff will crack and then it's going to fall apart. It's like it's a cake. You want to start layering it nicely and it has to work together.
Yeah, people that are familiar with our stuff, I think that Dublin's is a sort of an easy example of that, because Dublin, one of the last steps, Essex becomes Dublin when it gets this really hard wax, this molten wax that gets rolled onto the surface, gets sort of evenly coated on the surface. And once we've put that wax on, we don't really have the ability to change the color anymore, because there's this hard layer of wax. So if you put anything you put on top of that, it'll stay there for a little bit, but as soon as you start to do anything to it, that color is going to come off. So that's one of the challenges, I think, with any, this is sort of an aside, with any pull-up leather, is not only are you matching two colors, you're matching the way it looks when it's flexed, you're also matching the way it looks when it's not flexed. But in the case of something like Dublin, you're like, well, this is the color that it needs to be, and then you put the wax on it and it goes 12 shades darker, and you just have to hope that you're nailing it. We don't just hope. I mean, we've got some experience at this point, but yeah, I think that there's a lot of artistry that goes into finishing. I mean, not especially in certain parts of the world, because there are tanneries. We got a question like this, which maybe we can come back to at the end. But there are certain tanneries that all they do is finish. They buy crust. They're not doing any of the wet end stuff. They're buying crust and they're just finishing it because that's what they're good at. So there's it is a very specific and learned skill set to be a good finisher.
So have you ever experimented with using colored waxes, like a crayon type of thing?
Sure.
How's that work? I've never seen that.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah? What have I seen?
Vintage.
Oh.
Yeah. We put some color in that wax, depending on the color. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like putting. I mean, for us, I mean, maybe there's another ways to do it, but it's just like putting color in the top coat at that point.
Yeah.
You just have to make sure that the materials work well with each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Vintage being another Essex derivative, for anybody that's wondering.
Yeah, so like like you said, the concept is pretty big. I mean, so we talked about those basic the coats on that. Then you can also manipulate, how Nick mentioned, with the Dublin waxes, oils. Those will give you the pull up. And essentially, again, what are we? So the best thing to do is how would we finish something, and we have to first retrospect it, right? So if you want something that's waxy, you're going to do the color matching first to get your base, and then you apply your waxes, because how Nick said, good luck trying to get that color or any characteristic there when you have a nice big solids on top of the grain. Then you have different methods of techniques of machinery that we have. So I'm sure everyone knows about the embossing, because football, that's a pretty given one. That's a technique where obviously it's a plate with a piston and a bed, and you're essentially just making waffles. That's how I like to think of it. Just smashing the sides in there. You're giving it pressure. You're giving it time. And so at that point, it's a delicate balance of humidity. It's a delicate balance of your temperature and the time that you're running. All those factors will come into how your sides will.
Let me interrupt you there, though, because I think you and I and Nick take embossing or debossing for granted. But can you explain that a bit more? Because I think people are fascinated to see how that texture of a football or a basketball is pressed into the skin. Maybe you can describe how all that works in a little bit more detail.
Well, the type of art, football, the type of article that it is that it's by design. It has enough extract that we're using to give us that retention, and so it offers it, and it's just a really big thing, because you can grab a bunch of other leathers and throw it in there, and those same conditions won't work the same way because the actual crust isn't designed for that type of to hold that kind of pressure. So it'll look nice, but then if you go make a shoe or something, you're gonna see it kind of denature in a way because it's the elasticity of those articles. But for football, for ours, that's why you see it have that sort of retention. So again, to answer your question, how the process is, it's pretty straightforward where you're putting a big metal plate and you're pressurizing and you're holding it in there. And so then everything that's in there, the oil contents, everything will start to shrivel and kind of mold to that said plate. It's
How
pretty
much
cool.
pressure?
A lot.
Yeah, I think it was don't quote me on this.
This is
one.
maybe a secret, an industry.
Yeah, we're not gonna
secret.
give our
yeah.
our embossing specs away. It's the veg component.
Nick is running interference, which is good.
Yeah.
I guess the only thing
Yeah.
I'd say there is the embossing press is like 2 stories tall. It's huge.
Yeah, but it's a big, heavy piece of machinery because it has to be able to put a ton of pressure on it, and that's
Literal tons. Yeah.
Yeah. To Esteban's point, the retention or like the memory of the leather is a huge consideration, especially for something like a football, which is kind of a unique extreme example, but it works everywhere. Where we're putting the pattern into it, that pebble pattern, and the leather doesn't want, especially if the leather gets wet again, it wants to relax back to its smooth state and not keep that pebble pattern. So we've put a lot of work into cramming that texture in there enough so that even if it gets wet, like you're saying, like you're playing football in the rain or you're playing football with sweaty hands, that the pebble is not just going to relax completely out of the leather because that's really what it wants to do. And maybe the less intuitive part of that whole process is that the firmer the leather is, the more it will retain texture. And the softer something is, if you emboss it, it'll look okay. But if you put it in a shoe, like you said, Esteban, and you last the shoe over the toe, you could end up relaxing the pebble or the hatch grain or whatever texture you put into it out completely because you've stretched it. Now you've re-stretched it flat, and that texture just goes away. So there's a lot that, I mean, just putting a texture into a leather, there's a lot of thought that goes into what you have to do before that, depending on how you want it to look at the end.
I don't know. All I'll say is we skipped over that real fast, and every time I give a tour and show somebody that press and the football pebble, they're like, "Whoa, that's how it works." Like, people have no idea.
Yeah, everything, like the whole retanage is like leading up to that point. Like all the work is leading up to those, X seconds where the machine is closed.
By the way,
to get the
a little
pebble in there.
nitpicky here is it technically a deboss or is it?
I think
an
it
M?
is technically in most places of the world, they would say it's a deboss. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I've been saying it backwards for 15, 18 years.
I think the reverse pebble, the inverted football texture where it's like little suction cups, I think that's an emboss.
Yeah.
Because you're actually you're pushing the leather. I don't know. Who knows?
If whatever.
Well, it's like
Puts
a
a
golf
texture
We're
on
going to
it.
call it
It's
embossing.
inverted,
We call it embossing. We've only called it that for 100 years. Let's just keep going.
You were talking about dyes and your cake, Esteban, with your base coat, your top coat. Can you describe how those different methods of application work?
In terms of the components of the top coats, or
No, like I'm thinking about the difference, the applicators. So you got a spray machine, you got a brush, and you got a roll coater. Are there any other finish applicators that you use? And maybe describe what they are and why would you choose one or the other?
Well, I mean, for us. I mean, our main bread and butter is going to be your spray method, right? So your guns, kind of like when you. I think of it like when you spray, like you're spraying a car, right? You're using an aerosol. You're making what I said initially. You're making this dye as a carrier with either it be certain acrylics that you're putting in there for that type of performance, or water, or even just different types of solvents if you need them, right? So then you're using this water, you're putting it in there, you're pressurizing with air. It's an air gun, and so then you're creating an aerosol. So essentially, it's spraying out and essentially covering the sides. But you'll notice that the sides have, when you spray one line, it's not going to be fully covered. You're not drenching it everywhere. So it goes through multiple sprays, and that's why we have those road carousel guns, because each gun will tackle and kind of make an X, if you will, on the side. So the more coats that are going is an even coat, and it's not going to look blotchy. So that's really our main and better for us. I know other places have like roller coaters, or like the big thing for them. Essentially, it's you're grabbing a good amount of whatever dye or pigment, and you're uniformly passing it through a conveyor. You have curtain rollers, which is essentially a curtain coater. So it's literally that. I think that's the one you would probably use for like the plastic industry, where they're literally just drenching it, or even chocolate. I think I seen that
That's
one.
what I was thinking of. I was like,
how
oh, the
it's made, you're
chocolate.
just drenching it, and it just passes by and it coats it. So, but again, you have to make sure in those environments that everything has to be sealed. Because think about it, if you're running through all this pigment or dye, and you have dust or something, boom, now you got some dust there. So spray, I still feel that for us, it's our main driver for that, because it eliminates a lot of those issues.
Yeah, we also, and that's a good point too. I think that that's an important distinction, that it doesn't just go through once, like at least in our place. I mean, you can roll like a pretty heavy finish on there. We don't really do that, but it's like, since we're using mostly aniline finishes and we're finishing for a more natural look, we're building the color up over multiple thinner coats instead of just like putting one really thick coat on. And we do spray a lot. I think that Chrome XL gets, we call it a brush finish machine, but it's a seasoning machine. It's a bristled roller. So it gets a number of coats on there, and then it also gets a number of coats on this through the spray machine. So we're not even just sticking to one method. We're developing the color and adding the color in a couple different ways, depending on how much color we want to put on, with the nature of the materials and the color that we want, and everything. So it goes back to the complexity. And like you say, Phil, there's a million different combinations, how many coats and what you're putting on. And
you just enlightened me with the seasoning machine. I had heard that term before, but so you're saying that those cylindrical brushes are not brushes?
No, it's just what it's just. I think that
the rest of the world calls it something else.
I think that if you were to go into no one uses those machines anymore. I think that if you were to go into like the Turner tanning catalog in like 1932, that it would be you'd be ordering a seasoning machine, not a brush finish machine. I think.
Why do you think they call it that?
Why do they call it? That's a seasoning machine.
I'm wondering if they were applying something that wasn't finish, right? Like, what's a seasoning in their mind, do you think?
I have no idea.
Maybe they're applying oils or something.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of like an inefficient roll coater where so that machine, maybe we should describe it. There's a pan of dye that we can heat up or not, and then there's a corrugated roller that dips into that pan, and then that roller applies the dye to the brush, which then applies the dye to the leather, which we then even out by hand. So it's a very complicated way to put
that machine takes 5 people to run.
I mean, I feel like I wouldn't say it's inefficient, but think of it like we have light bulbs now, and that's still the original, the OG of it, right? Like the initial lantern, which is pretty cool, because it's still an old method that works, and it's the fact that the mechanisms are pretty simplified, that you can easily fix and move things around, and it's really a versatile thing that's been going for a while. So it is an old method, but it's more of a traditional method, right?
I mean, it's a roll coater. A roll coat machine is a similar technology where there's a corrugated roller that's picking up the material and then deposits it on the surface, and it just forgoes all the other stuff. So it's just you have a roller with more has finer corrugations in it, or finer depressions if you want, depending on what you're applying, and that's just the nature of what you're applying, whether or not that works or not. But that's a much more efficient way to do it instead of having.
Right.
Well, what's the visual result between the two then, if you were to run Chrome XL on each?
Well, the roll coat machines, they're putting a much heavier coat of whatever they're putting on. I mean, it's just you're picking up, actual, like an appreciable amount of dye, like drops of dye, instead of like brushing it on with think of like a shoe brush. I mean, it's kind of like the same. It's like a bristled brush, so you can put a much lighter coat on, but there's complications there because the bristles need to get replaced, and you have to clean the machine a ton.
So you can't do light coats on the roll coater.
You can't. I feel that you can, because I've seen, for example, this is another one we're jumping, right? It's not dyes or pigments, But there is another upgrade part of the finish where it's called like plastering, right? Like you broke a hole in the wall and you want to plaster. There is compacts resins that the suppliers have that you can apply that onto the side. So if there's any imperfections, any holes that you see, the roll coater can you adjust it, but it can just do a light application of that, and then from there, now you're covering those voids, right? So it's upgrading your sides. But the roller coater, like I do agree, like it's the next gen, right? It's like I feel like the BFM or the brush finishing, which was the original, the pioneer, and then it's the roller coater starts like the evolution of that. So they both have their pros and cons, right? I mean the level, but again, it is pretty cool that we are one of the last ones that still runs it, right? It's like I don't think many.
See, I'm trying to
places-
figure out that answer though. Like, is that cool or is that just being stubborn? Like,
No, it's better. I mean, it's you can put it's different. I mean, you put it completely different. It's a different way to apply the material. I'm trying to think of an example that's maybe a little bit more relatable.
well, think about painting a wall.
Yeah, I mean, it would be like that's a tough one too, because you
How about
always
staining a big piece of wood as you would
you're always
with a
gonna
roll
paint-
brush? Yeah.
you always paint. That's still effectively brushing though. And because you have a lot more control over that, and then it's like, I guess the painting example. Imagine you have a piece of wood that's flat on the ground, and you can dip your brush in, and you can paint it, and then you can really control how much is going in each square inch of it, or you can try to enrobe it, like you can pass it through a machine where you're applying, where it's like dripping down like a waterfall, and you'll get a really heavy even coat like that, but you're also getting a really heavy even coat. You're covering up everything that's below, and you're not. So you lose a ton of the ability to put a lighter coat on and maintain sort of the leathery quality of the.
But you're
of
talking about like
the
a
hide.
curtain coater, right?
Yeah, but a roll coat machine is doing that on like a much smaller scale. It's sort of like an in between, where it's dropping on like a little bead of a curtain, I guess. It's kind of hard. If you see it in action, it's a little bit easier to understand, but it's not an intuitive thing. You're thinking about picking up an amount of material in the steel roller and then dropping it on, and I mean one of the main advantages there, other than you can put a ton of material on, is that it's kind of self-leveling, because as long as your machine is level, you put the material through, and there's enough material there that it'll level everything out, which, to Esteban's point, does a lot to upgrade the surface if that's the goal, to sort of cover up whatever's happening, which isn't really our.
I'm pushing
jam.
back a lot because I'm actually curious.
Yeah, no, keep going.
All right. I don't feel sad. Honestly, if I'm honest with you, Nick, I don't feel satisfied with the answer, but I guess I'll just have to believe you.
You'll have to, I think the only way, because I think you know enough, the only way you'd be really satisfied, you'll have to,
Just
if
see
you
it.
saw them,
Yeah.
like if you took and ran the same piece of leather through, the 3 or 4 different methods, and then looked at each one of them, you'd be like, oh, I can see why you might do some combination of these, or you would not do this one for that product.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, you can adjust the concentration. I mean, you could roll on a dye coat that doesn't have a ton of dye in it, but then it's like, what's the point? It's not efficient. You're already giving away the efficiency of that progress, or of that process. I mean, by diluting the coat.
I'm recalling my experience now that one of the reasons that you wanted to use the brush seasoning machine for the Chrome Excel die coats as opposed to rolling them was it has a little bit more penetration somehow. But I don't remember why that was. Was it like the heat was hotter because it's steam heated as it goes in there? I don't know. Maybe I know you can kettle heat on the roll coater. I don't know. Maybe there's something to do with like how far that die coat can go through. Or I'm just imagining it. Whatever. Sorry,
It's a
that's
mystery.
just an aside. I'm just
mystery of the
recalling it.
ages.
I was recalling having this battle before because I think Dan and I, but mostly Dan, was trying to fight for a roll coater for these types of applications on the Chrome Excel. And I think it was like, hey, we've done it this way, so we're just not going to mess with it. So just stop asking.
It does work.
It does.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. You have to heat, the leather gets heated, the dye gets heated, and then you you introduce the two to each other. And even after it gets brushed on, we still have to even it out by hand. And like what you said, Phil,
It's a
5
disaster.
people.
That's why there was a motivation to move away from it, because it's such a pain. Yeah,
It's good though.
it's good though. I mean, all the
like
things
it.
with Chrome Excel are pain. Air drying it for 10 days, nightmare. Takes forever.
It does.
You want something good or you want something bad? Then it takes time. Things take time, right? It's like
Do you want something good or do you want something fast?
Yeah, you can't have it both here. So there's
the
a
triangle.
lot of constraint.
Yeah,
The other
fast,
one,
good, or free, right? Those are the three. Those are the 3 points of the triangle.
Pick 2.
the other I guess technique and modification of upgrades that I can think of as well is the impregnation. I'm sure you probably talked about that one before. Or
I mean, we haven't actually, but I was thinking to ask you about that because it's amazing. You roll us through the no pun intended the concept.
So impregnation essentially is an upgrade where it's like, let's say you do have loose leather. Something happened, you're like, oh crap, I gotta figure this out. So impregnation allows what happens if you talk about what loose leather is that essentially it's the grain and your corium separated. So when you bend it over, it shrivels. So the technique of impregnation is to try to stitch those sections together. So the resins will go in. That's why you need a balance of your acrylic and your resins, but you also need a penetrator to carry. That's where I would say that's really more important, like as opposed to dyes, because you're not really trying to get dyes inside. You've already done that in the finishing aspect. But for resins, for impregnation, you want to be able to stitch those. It has to go in malleable inside the leather, and then when it dries, it'll fixate onto those sections. So essentially, it's like you're stitching things together in a way, in a molecular level. And
Have you guys seen those amazing tables that they'll make out of really gnarled wood? I have a visual example. This guitar has this crazy like knot in it. This is not resin filled in, but have you seen wood tables that have these sorts of like gaps that are not flat, that they just pour in resin in like crazy colors and then they sand it down? I think of the leather analogy is similar to the wood one. I think it's super cool.
I would say more or less would be like that. But again, your target goal for this technique impregnation is to fix looseness. And so because you're freezing your sides and I like to think of it as just a patch, you're patching it essentially.
Right.
But the consequence with this is that now it makes it a harder, going back to what Nick was saying with the Dublin. Now you're just going to be more challenging, because now how are you supposed to get everything to properly go in? If you're trying to put waxes, good luck trying to put waxes in there, because you're creating this sort of barrier there to keep it from being loose. So you have to approach it differently now in terms of those that type of technique. It works, but again, you have to modify it, because now you're filling these voids inside your leather. And so the more you're filling it with, the harder it is for any other things that you're trying to modify. If you're trying to put modifiers on top, like I said, like a silky top or something soft, now we have to be more careful in seeing, will this latch on? Because it'll spray and it'll be good, but then later on it comes right off, right? So again, it's an upgrade for your leather, the impregnation, essentially what it is.
What are some of the leathers that you do that way?
I know you mentioned Mystic. Mystic was one that we run.
Do you run a lot of Mystic anymore?
I think it's been a while since we ran that one.
Yeah. I was the only customer. I liked it. It's nice. It would get really shiny because of that resin. You make it pretty bright. If you're listening out there, boot makers and other leather people, order some Mystic so we can see it. It's awesome.
We can't forget as well the other methods for finishing, right? Because that would still fall under the finishing regime. Tumbling. So again, when we were asking right about like, do we condition certain sides for all? It depends. If you want something soft and tumbled, you're gonna want it to kind of shrivel and kind of relax the fibers. So tumbling would be another aspect on that. Just really depends on what you're trying to make. But that would be another technique that you use.
When we were talking about toggling earlier, I've noticed that most toggled leathers, or maybe not most, I don't even know, some toggled leathers go to dry tumbling to achieve that pebble pattern I was talking about.
Yep. And then the other
Just
one,
spitting facts here, you guys.
the other one would be
Mostly true.
Yeah.
The other one would be the plating.
I'm just kidding.
The other one is the plating machine. So then at that point, it serves as two sections that you can work with, right, with your leather. So when you spray something, normally you would use there's a term called sandblast. So the type of roller has kind of grooves in it, and so when you're passing it through, it helps it sort of kind of like ironing, right? Ironing a shirt. Like if you're, or a perfect example is like when you have those, what do you call those little patches, and then you iron the patch. So then
An
that
iron-on patch, yeah.
yeah. So it's acting that way where it's helping kind of that you're not squishing with high pressure, but just enough pressure for it to just seal. And you're sealing it as you're going through your process. And then when you finish your leather, oftentimes depending on like if you want it to be nice and bright and glossy, that the plating, the smooth plating will help that in terms of bringing out that shine. So that's another machinery that we use as well to further enhance your
Basically everything goes through that machine.
Yeah.
There's like a sandblast is like a satin finished roller, and the smooth roller is like a mirror finish. So you can sort of imagine that the mirror finish is going to give you something that's closer to a mirror finish because it's super smooth. Especially if you put something on there like a hard wax or like a top coat that wants to get shiny, and the sandblast does the same thing, but you get like the little micro texture in it, so you don't get the shine. And I think what you're saying, Esteban, is like there's almost like it's almost like a heat set component to some of the finishes that you can get when you do that at the end. But it's good. I mean, it lays everything flat and gives you a nice presentable, even surface at the end, and you can control speed and pressure and heat, because that's a machine with a roller instead of like the football press that just goes up and down. Maybe interesting to say that you can't just spray. I mean, and maybe it's more obvious than I think it is, but you can't just like spray something and then put it straight through that machine. A lot of times there's like an overnight rest period, or you need to let something cure for even like a week before it's going to go through the next process, because you're doing a lot. You're doing a lot to the fibers of the skin in general, but also to the surface as you're applying all of this stuff. So
speaking of rolling things on the leather, speaking of a smooth roller, I want to talk about the most clickbaity visual of the tannery of rolling and glazing, which people may or may not have seen, but maybe you guys could explain what those do.
Yeah, rolling is just like what we just talked about. But it's on the roller itself is 8 inches across instead of 80. It's like it's small, and there's no heat, so it's always smooth, or it's always cool. So you're rolling it, and the pressure is what it is. There's a little bit of control, but not quite to the extent that we get it on that larger machine. So it's kind of like a mini version of that, and all the cordovan gets rolled because it's a veg and it doesn't really want to be heated anyway. And glazing is sort of like that times 10, where instead of having a stainless roller that moves, that rolls over the leather, it's a fixed glass rod that's clamped into the arm of this machine, and with pressure and friction, it's being pulled across the surface of the leather, and it's giving you like an extreme burnishing effect in a very short period of time. Sort of, if you were to imagine, like if you took a piece of cordovan or leather, I guess in general, and just sort of rubbed your hand over it, or a piece of cloth over it for a really long time, you'd build up some shine. Like this, you sort of are doing that, but over seconds. And it also has the effect of compacting the fibers and sort of setting everything into place. But yeah, those are.
I have a video I might try to post over this YouTube video of the rolling process. When I said clickbaity, I said that because Dan put up a video. It was just like a throwaway thing of him at work. I'm like, let's put it on Instagram. And it's got 310,000 views of this guy just, I don't know if you can see it. Right? Just like rolling this stuff.
Just rolling.
People love to click it or look at it because it's horrifying. It looks It looks terrifying, but it's
it's not scary. It looks like it is, but
it's fine. From that angle, it looks a lot scarier.
Yeah, but it's that equipment's super old. I mean there are 4 of those machines. There's 2 rolling jacks and 2 glazing jacks, and they're all run by one motor, which is attached to the ceiling, and that motor runs a single shaft, and each of the glazing jacks has a belt that you can slip on and off of the shaft. So that's like the original way, like all the equipment would have been run. And instead of like putting a motor on each one, we're like, we'll just put one motor in and just like slap it onto the end of this shaft that's already there. And it works.
It's probably
Like a clutch
pre-electric
almost.
motors, right?
Yeah.
Probably
Definitely. Yeah.
I like to think of it as
boiler-driven.
like with like in the cars when you're engaging and disengaging a clutch. That's essentially what it is. Just
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Old school clutch.
It's a one speed.
The only other thing that I think we've missed are, it's boarding and I suppose buffing. Who wants to take boarding?
Boarding is just a very simple machine. The leather gets pulled in the machine and basically flexed in one direction into a certain angle, and it's a softening machine. And the idea or the prevailing theory is that when you do that, you're softening the parts of the leather that are hard and not softening anymore the parts that are already soft. So it's sort of like an evening out of temper, I guess. It's pretty not, we don't do that to everything. It's pretty,
Not frequently used.
it's frequently used, but it's not, I mean, maybe not in other places in the world, but yeah.
I'll tell you this: your dad loves to hardboard everything
Oh, well, that's different.
by
though.
hand.
That's when you're folding something back against itself, like the grain. So folding grain to grain, and forcing it to do that, to develop that pebble texture.
Yeah,
It's a good look.
Tip for any leather worker, shoe people. Every time I go into your dad's office, Nick, he's got some
So we're
leather.
losing your leather into the beach.
Oh yeah, I know. So nobody will see the beach. By the way, I've got a Zoom call going of me hanging out on the beach, so nobody's going to see that. But I'm losing it. This is a piece of Dublin. But every time I go into your dad's office, Nick, he's got some leather where he has boarded it by putting the grain against itself and then pressing down with a bit of pressure and rolling it backwards. So that's the boarding process, and you tend to get this like pipey look. And he always like polishes the little pattern
With his fingernail.
Everything. That's like his go-to is the hand board and like glaze it, which is is awesome.
Yeah, if you do it in one direction and then turn it
Crossboard, yeah.
90 degrees, and then so you can make like a sort of impromptu hatch grain. If you get a leather that does what you want it to do, it looks awesome. Yeah.
Nobody will see that. But those
Yeah.
little bits of pipiness is a hard board. The more you know.
And then buffing, right? That's what you mentioned, buffing on that one. Essentially, it's just, I like to think of it as sanding, right? We're sanding stuff down. So you had your full grain, you have your corrected grain. That's your distinguish, or you have semi, just a little bit, just a light sanding, if you will. So you're essentially ripping that. You're putting an abrasion on that full grain. You're doing one in part. It serves as twofold, right? Depending on the article, but essentially you're cleaning any sort of imperfections. If the sides showed some scarring, it cleans that up. So it's an upgrade, and then also it helps for the dyeing and the penetrating, because think about it, you just created an app, right? So you have little tiny fibers, just kind of, if microscopic fibers just hanging out there like wicks. So when you do that it helps assist right away to absorb whatever you're trying to put in. So it tremendously helps as well in terms of uptaking any sort of dye or anything in general. But again, it's another upgrade characteristic for your leather, right? So
it is sanding. Yeah. And there are different grits. I mean, you can go from
different levels
coarse to really fine grits, and you can, adjust pressures. And I mean, the biggest challenge in that, is at times just controlling the dust, like the leather dust that gets generated.
I do know that there's polishing machines that have brush, like very fine bristle brushes that will sort of like smear a wax and like just level everything out. And a rubber they'll do it with too. I don't know if you would consider those buffing.
No, that's like you're talking about like a polishing machine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like an industrial version of like a shoe buffing machine that you have like in your closet. It's kind of like the same thing, but imagine sandwiching it in between two, being able to affect how much pressure you're putting against the roller, and then instead of having, like this shaggy roller, it could be felt, of varying degrees of softness and firmness, and the machine that we have has like a stone, actually it has a stone, like a really smooth stone roller in it, which I guess is not something that is commonly used anymore. But yeah, we don't use that machine as much as maybe we should.
To conclude, to make finished leather, again, it's an arbitrary thing depending on what we're making. But if let's say you're going to finish a standard full grain leather, it doesn't get buffed. It's going to go from after it's been dried. It's going to be conditioned if it needs to. It's going to get staked. From being staked, that's another aspect where, assuming that's the way you want it, you can go ahead and start doing your coats. You start with your adhesion coat, you start with your base coat, and then you finish up with your top coat. In between these, you will either do your ironing and your plating machine, and then from there, now you can go ahead and do your sort. And I think we haven't even touched that, but that's the final one where you're trimming, you're cleaning it up, you're giving it a thumbs up before it goes out the door. So that would be
final QC.
Yeah, final QC. That would be pretty much the generic step of that, and it'll vary depending on what article we're trying to finish.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks. That was a good one.
Yeah, and dye coats could be 1 coat, it could be 5 coats. I mean, it just depends on the color and the article, and there's a lot of variables.
All right. Well, what do we have for questions from the last episode or for finishing?
So, all right. So we got a question from Brian Beaver 3596, and he's saying that there are a couple different kinds of tanneries. There's tanneries that start from the very beginning with the hair on and go all the way to the end. So that they do their own wet blue processing or whatever base tan processing that might need to happen. And then there's those that are going from retanning forward. And I think that's part of it. So but it gets even more, you can separate out even more than that. So there are tanneries that do just the wet blue part. So they're selling it, wet blue. And that's a lot of basically all of the big beef processing guys or girls or companies or whatever. They'll tan wet blue because it's easier. It's a value add. There's big economies of scale there. And it's easier to export because most of the hides in the US are going to China and Italy and South Korea. So it's almost all going away. So it's not perishable anymore either. It's easier to transport. It's easier for, documentation purposes and all that stuff. So there's tanneries that just do that. There are tanneries that take it all the way through, like you said, and there are tanneries that take it just from retanning. And there are tanneries that do parts of that too. So we mentioned it earlier in the podcast, but there are places that buy crust too. So they don't really do any of the wet end. They're just doing the finishing application, which then means there are tanneries that are just taking it to the crust. So there's like every sort of variation that you can imagine. There's tanneries that do that. I think that in most people's brains, when they think about tannery, they're probably thinking about these two types that he's mentioning, though. Either it's from raw all the way to the end, or it's from retanning forward. And I think that retanning forward in the world these days is probably the most common. Most tanneries are doing that.
I mean, as for the trade-offs, I mean, it depends, right? Like if you can take control of part 1 and 2 of both of it, you have total control and oversee manipulation of what's happening. But then if you only do one section, you can specialize on that section, but you relinquish that sort of control to someone else to provide you. So either being the crust finished or the blues. So it's a give or take, right? Ideally, you would want all of it, which is great. But that also demands a lot of resources in terms of your real estate, your workers. There's a lot more moving pieces, but it's almost like how you were like the Apple thing, right? I don't know if you want to cut this out, but I'm like thinking like how the Macs are, where Now they are controlling all in-house on their stuff, so they have maximum control. As opposed to before, they used to use their processors from a third party. So kind of the same sort of thing where
Oh, for sure. It gives them a special advantage, a unique advantage over their competitors. I switched to a MacBook, and I'm old now. Mine's a little old. I have the M2, and it's awesome.
yours
Or
is an
M2
M2.
Ultra.
I'm
M2
still
Ultra.
using my 2014 MacBook. It freezes when Spotify turns on. I love
Oh
it.
no! So you gotta get it
I just love the Apple logo, the lighting up. It just was cool, and then they took it away. So now it's like a generic.
That's the only reason you keep it.
Yeah, I love it. It's
To
just
see
vintage.
for the part that you don't see when you're using it.
The best one. So that's like I take a look at the other side.
What other questions we got there, Nick?
There's one that says, "What does waterproof even mean for a tannage, and where does Shackleton fit into this?" This is a good Esteban question. Why don't you take that one?
All right. So then for waterproofing, that's one of the more specialized and kind of pretty delicate techniques that you need to do because again, the leathers we've been talking about moisture, hydration, hydrostability, and with waterproofing, it's kind of like you're battling against water because you want everything to repel away from it. So you have to start manipulating it from the ground up, right? So from the retan, it has to be ideally, if you want it to be good, it has to be from that structure. You're incorporating silicones, you're incorporating waxes inside the retan, so it's fully from the corium. And then in the finishing aspect, you will go ahead and start treating again with another type of specialized silicone or a repelling oil, essentially to cover the grain. But again, it depends on the what is it that we're trying to accomplish? Because like I know in the past, technically Chrome Excel was water resistant, right? It's just because of the natural oils.
Waterproof.
But
Used to be able to call it waterproof. Yeah.
yeah. But then you start to see like at work as well at Horween, it's like we do our QC in our lab where we do testing for waterproofness. Like we've just done all of these oils and all these silicons, and we want to see if it actually works. So you test it at crust and you test it at final. So there's two types of tests that come to mind that we use that are pretty standard. It's kinetic absorption or static absorption. So static absorption essentially is if you're grabbing your leather that you cut to the specification and you just let it drench in water, not moving and just static. So then you come and you check later after X amount of time in the spec and see how much water was absorbed. And you'll come to find some leathers where if they're waterproof, that's fine. It works. There's no water penetration in it because everything is repelling from the outside in. But then you have the kinetic absorption, which is essentially now we're stress testing the leather that you're emulating a shoe where it's making the creases when you're walking. So you're grabbing this leather and you're putting it in a machine that's flexing it. So a mazer flexor. So it's causing these almost like a little boat. And so you're stressing it. You're not allowing that water to either move or not. And so I feel that that's a true test because you can see how much water goes in and then how much it absorbed in it, obviously, because at that point you'll notice, is it truly waterproof? Because there's leathers that run in unconditionally well and some that offer, you'll come to find that the structures open up when you finish it. So it was great at crust and now it's a disaster in finishing. What happened? So you have to retrospect and see what's going on when you're making these articles. But yeah, interesting enough. I mean, again, with waterproofing, it's not just because we need it to repel water, but we also need the leather to be breathable, right? Because if it's not breathable, then now you're gonna have, if it's not breathable, it's not gonna have all this moisture inside that shoe or whatever that you're trying to make, and it's gonna be cause problems as well. So there's a balance between those two things that are going on in waterproofing.
Yeah, and then if people Google like waterproof testing leather, they'll probably see the mazer machine, which is you cut a little square of leather and it gets held into these two clamps or clips. It gets screwed into these two blocks in the machine, and the leather gets dipped into, it's actually submerged, partially submerged in the water, and then it gets flexed over and over and over and over again. And the machine keeps track of how many times it gets flexed, and the different specs, say like, oh, this leather needs to meet, jeez. This leather needs to reach. That was the combination of meat and reach. Meach. It needs to reach 20,000 flexes or 10,000 flexes or whatever whatever the spec is before any water starts to beat up on the inside of that little like leather boat that we've made. So it's a pretty rigorous test, I would say. You're basically saying like you need to be able to take 20,000 steps in a puddle before any water comes in the top of your shoe, or whatever the spec on the.
To the questioner's point, 20,000 steps, man, that's 2 days. So like, who cares? I don't know.
But is your foot underwater for 2 days?
Exactly. I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I mean, it's just a standard language. It's like any of these testing methods. It's just a way for everyone to test it and be able to test it the same way. It's not a real world test. I mean, none of them really are.
I guess it would be 4 days because you have 2 feet.
So, I mean, if you're over there on that beach, that would be more concerned with that. But I mean, you're not day to day, you're not really using that. It's more of those. It's the same disclaimer like when you have waterproof watches, right? It says like it goes for X amount of meters, but it says for 30 minutes or for an hour because eventually the water will seize. It's pretty strong in terms of those characteristics that just give it time, like anything, right? But so there's definitely cutoffs in the standards that you make for waterproof. But again, that's because of those barriers that we're fighting in the inside of the leather. It definitely makes you more picky in terms of how our articles are going to be. You're not as free forming and trying to make waterproof and make it super tough or super glossy. Like you're going to have to do some compromises in certain sections of your performance, right? Because again, waterproofing is to seal internal water, and a lot of we were talking about dyes and pigments. Some of these are water-based, and well, a good amount of them are water-based. So again, you're fighting those natural things as well. So there's a lot of back and forth in terms of finishing when you're doing a waterproof system. But the key though is to do it in the retan and finishing, and they both have to work together. Because if not, they'll counteract each other, and then you're back to square one, and you have regular leather.
And Shackleton's an example of a waterproof leather.
That would be a waterproof leather because you are incorporating, like you said, these waterproofing oils on there, and you're giving it that repelling factor onto it. Yeah, that was relatively new. I would say it was like a year now, right? I believe that we started developing that.
All right, next question.
Don't get me started. I harp on waterproof all the time because I'm just like
I just went off.
Unless it's a waterproof construction, it just doesn't even matter. So it's like you gotta think about what you're making.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll make whatever you want. Esteban, specific question to Esteban. What are your favorite leathers to make at Horween Tannery? What are your favorite leathers to use? Are there any leathers from other tanneries that you respect or like in terms of how they look, feel, or are made on a technical level?
For me, the ones at Horween that pop up is going to be obviously football. I mean, I know during my stay there in career there, I've been seeing it and developing as it's going, and I got appreciation to it. That would be one, obviously, but the other one that pops into my head is Roadmaster. I do love that one, and that one's also what we've been talking about in terms of the finishing system, where this leather looks like a road. That's what they call it, Roadmaster, because it has those crackling effects. So it starts off hard, the top is hard, and then when you tumble it, it creates that sort of cracking effect. It got this stressed look. So I like that. It's waterproof, which is cool. That's one of my favorites. And then as for non-Horween leather, the thing I can think about right off the bat is a couple of years ago when I first moved to the apartment, we got a good deal with my cousin, these leather chairs, and it's from Crate and Barrel. I mean, I didn't go there specifically, but it's been holding pretty well. It's sleek. I don't know.
Oh, how dare you?
It's I still for upholstery I can think of it's pigmented for sure, but I do like the feel of like the silkiness when you sit down, and it hasn't cracked. And I do know it's real leather because I could see the flesh side of it, so I know they weren't.
Would you get a swatch of it from there? Or?
No, it was right under the chair. Like you take off the pillow, and there's like a little flap of the. I don't know if you can see it here, but it's pretty basic. But I do love the sliding movement when it hasn't cracked, which is good. But yeah, I mean, as far as non-Horween leather, it's kind of interesting. That was definitely a good question because I mean, I would definitely have to explore a little more to see what the differences are. But I think for sure the first thing I notice in terms of the difference is by far the smell. Ours gives us a unique smell to that leather. Every other leather I've noticed has a weird, not a weird, but just a different smell to it, characteristic. So that's what I think I would probably put out for that.
You smell the components.
Yeah.
I think it like when, and I mean, obviously I'm a fan of our stuff. Ours smells like you would think leather smells, and when you get other stuff, you're smelling components, like you're smelling resins or solvents or dyes. Like you're not getting like a complete package. You're sort of getting like it smells like a detergent or a cleaner or something like that. But
right.
That's just my own.
I think the smell is actually the most important part on it. If I'm on, I mean, most important is weird to say, but most impactful thing when people come into my store, that's the first thing. And I'm sure the Tannery too. Wow, it smells crazy, right? It's like a big deal to a lot of people.
Yeah, there's something too. You know, when you open that, you buy a pair of shoes and you open the shoebox, and especially if it's gone through whatever UPS and it's been warm outside, and you bring it and you open it, like it's an experience.
I
So
actually
think
have the
in
opposite
general.
experience a lot, where it smells like adhesives, and it
Yep.
really upsets me.
Yeah, yeah, the glue. Well, because that's the last major thing that would have been applied. Either glue, some sort of adhesive, or whatever. If it's a case of a shoe, like some sort of shoe polish, which have a similar smell.
They just glue it and throw it in the box. Here you go.
I mean, hopefully not, but I mean, it happens.
I'm
I guess
telling
most
you,
of the
like,
shoes are made that way.
When I
This-
get
these- in this-
some
this
stuff,
world.
it's really off-putting.
Yeah,
Said it.
for me, like it's interesting because I don't find a lot of shoes that, like how we were talking about waterproofing, where there's different constructions and it's not just leather by itself. But like this one, I got a couple years from Wolverine. I don't know if you guys can see, but this one is my favorite because it's literally Roadmaster, but it's just there's no lining. It's just natural, so it's kind of
Yeah.
cool. And I do like this is what I was telling about the crackling effect, where you can see like there's a patch like right here where you can see the crust almost, but that's just natural friction and stuff like that. So it's probably one of my favorite ones. So
That's awesome.
It's cool. It's a cool leather.
yeah, definitely.
Would you guys be interested in doing some favorites? Because I'm very excited to share with you my favorite. But
Sure.
if there's anything that you guys have been doing, I know you last time yours was brewing, Esteban. What else are you doing to chill out?
Nothing crazy this weekend. I mean, I am getting married, so I'm staying in as much as possible this month. So I'm just gonna be chilling with my fiance and watch some movies. I've been reading. That's one. I've been reading Lord of the Rings.
No way.
So
Awesome.
I had to buy the books because I couldn't focus on the tablet. So that's what I'm reading. So it's just been reading. I've been trying to expand my instead of watching TV, right? TV.
Nice, man. How far have you gotten?
Halfway through the first book, and that took about 6 months. So
I've never read it, but have you gotten to
Another 4 years, it'll be done.
have you gotten to
it's a slow burn.
have you gotten to Tom Bombadil yet?
That's the dude with the forest. Yeah, I'm past that now. Yeah.
Okay,
It was
alright.
it was like 2-3 chapters of being in the forest. I was like, Jesus, like, come on, let's pick up the pace here.
Tom's a chill bro.
but
He just loves singing.
But I the reason I told this because it's themed, because like now it's like Katie, my fiance, she got me my my ring. We got a wedding band, and then I got a Frodo chain. So like if I'm at work, I can take the thing off and put it there because I don't want to lose my ring if I'm working. So I got a Frodo chain now. So I got to finish those series now.
That's awesome, man.
I thought you were going to tell me you're having a Lord of the Rings themed wedding.
Oh no, she'll kill me. She'll kill me if she sees
And I was like, this sounds amazing.
Have you guys read the books already?
Yeah.
Nope. I did not.
Really?
No.
Takes a little bit.
I just have no patience. I need like very straightforward books or
There are a lot of names. What are you talking about? Straightforward books.
I'm very linear, man. Like I have a hard time with books that are all over the place. Like I've been trying to Stephen King's Stand. It's just like I get the concept of it, but it's just like you said, all the characters, and he starts one story, and then like the next chapter is a totally different story. I have a hard time. So I like The Martian. It's like guy on planet, he does the thing. It's one guy. Like that's very easy for me. That's what I need. Yeah.
I listen to the Lord of the Rings music to try to get me into the mood of reading it. I know Katie hates it. She's like, "Why are we listening to this elfish music again?" And I'm like, "I need to get in the zone." So, but yeah.
All right, what do you got, Nick? You got a favorite?
Well, I watched the 3-Body Problem at your suggestion before.
Yeah.
It was good. I liked it.
The book's better.
It was good enough that I will read the book because I want to like know what happens. So I'll read the.
It's good news that they
read them.
have announced they're going to do
Yeah.
the second book because that's much more exciting, I think.
It's called Three Bodies.
3-Body
It's a
Problem.
3-Body Problem.
If you like sci-fi, you might be into it.
But that's not my favorite. I read a book a while ago, and I can't remember if I mentioned it or not, but I think you might like it. It's called The Bomber Mafia, and it's by Malcolm Gladwell. It's short, but it talks about I think it's super interesting, and talks about just like the rise to prominence that the Air Force had during World War II. And there's a really, I think, awesome section of it on the Norden bomb site and how complicated it was. And it was basically an analog computer. And it talks about like imagine you're driving your car on the highway and you try to like hit a stop sign with a baseball. Like that's what they were trying to do, like from the plane. So they needed like these analog computers so they could drop ordnance where it needed to go. But the guy that developed this analog computer was just out of his mind and like a perfectionist and horrible to work for, but it was like this really important piece of technology. But that's just a little part of the book. But yeah, The Bomber Mafia. It's good.
You know what? That's already on my list.
It's a quick read or listen.
5 hours is my audiobook, it says.
Yep.
All right. Well, I should be embarrassed about this, but I am not. In the past, I did a favorite about Slay the Spire, which again, if you guys like amazing video games and you're a nerd, check out Slay the Spire. But there's this other one. It's another deck builder rogue-like game. It's called Balatro, which is a weird word. Or maybe it's Balatro. I don't know. But essentially, it's a deck builder, but it's poker rules. So you get 4 decks of cards, and you try to make the best hand you can, and you can draw like a bunch of cards. And as you play, you can, from your winnings, you can buy different jokers that affect your hands in certain ways. So one might be like, hey, every time you get a flush, you get more points, right? You get more chips. And there's like bosses and different things. But the cool thing is just, it seems really stupid because it's like, oh, you can just play poker. But the way that they've designed it is very, in the same way that Slay the Spire is genius, is it gets exponentially crazy because your jokers are doing a bunch of stuff and they affect other jokers. So it's literally exponential. So if people like deck builders and if you're a total dork like me, check out Balatro. Esteban, I'm looking at you.
Balatro. I'll check it out.
I don't know. Do you like card games?
I've been playing a little more of a Hold'em for a little bit. So that's fun.
Just throw on some elf music and
I'll buy it for you. Yeah, throw on. All right. Well, hey Nick, sidebar here, just you and me. Congrats on episode 50, man.
Yeah, you too. We did it.
We're done, right? So just quit.
Okay. No, it's been good.
That seems like a real number.
I think I'm having fun.
Yeah, I know.
I think there's a million things that we can still talk about as long as people are still wanting to listen to it. I'm still having fun.
Me too, man. And actually, on that note, so episode 51 might not come out for a little bit of a longer time because I'll be playing that festival in the UK with Meshuggah, which is insane. And then I'll be in New York the week after. So I'm going to be out for a couple of weeks. So we might not have another one until September. Kind of a bummer.
But I might see if I can figure something out.
Yeah, if you want to record something on Zoom, I'll edit it, or you can just post it yourself. I don't care. Let's just give the people what they want, Nick. More.
Yeah, well, maybe I can get someone talking on the phone. Like maybe I can get Tom or Mike Halpert or some of the old. I was going to say old.
Yeah, careful.
Timers, but that's not
young old timers.
Elder statesmen. I don't know. Yeah,
Tom would be so killer. We got to talk to him because he's got the most experience of anybody like in the world. like maybe literally in terms of like hides and just the leather business out changing over decades. I mean, he's 60 something years of experience.
Yeah,
it's crazy. All right.
Yeah.
Let's wrap it up. Thank you, Esteban. Really appreciate you coming to help us out, and I think the audience for sending those good questions too.
Yeah.
Have a good night, guys. Have a good weekend.
Bye bye.